Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
Hello, I'm Lorene Mills, and welcome to Report from Santa Fe. We have a great guest today, Stanley Crawford. I've been a fan of your writing for so long. Welcome.
Hey, great to be here, Lorraine.
Well, you're an author and a farmer, but you have been writing for how many years?
I think I started seriously in '63 in Greece, but when I was a technical writer, I had so little to do. I wrote 2 novels which were never published.
Well, the ones that were published, there's quite a lot of them. I'm going to quickly kind of go in reverse order here, if you can stop me and give me a synopsis about 1 or 2 that you're particularly fond of. I would like to. There's a bunch of them that I haven't read. The new one, of course, I've read, but they are just intriguing. So let's start with Petroleum Man, and that was 2005, right?
Right, and that's told by a billionaire who was the inventor of the thingy, which I never defined what it is, but he made billions. And the plot is basically his collection of cars, starting with the first family cars, and he gives scale models to his grandchildren, and he works his way through his life through his cars. Well, the grandchildren don't really appreciate it. It's a sort of Trump novel before Trump.
Uh-huh.
He's a Trump-like character, and I had to live with him for over a year. It was very painful because I sent up all my liberal pieties through him. But I finished it, and it has now a life of its own.
Another one, and I don't have it to show, but one that I've been intrigued with since the 70s, 1972. This has almost become a cult novel. It's called The Log of the SS, the Mrs. Unguentine. And where did that come from? Why are professors still teaching it year after year after year?
That came out of the blue. Rosemary and I came back to the States. It was her first visit in 1968 to the Bay Area, which was a terrible time to return to this country. I was driven into silence. I didn't know how to talk. I didn't know how to act. I'd been living abroad basically for 7 years in my 20s and early 30s. And I stopped writing for 6 months, the first time in 5 or 6 years that I was not writing. And then a sentence or 2 came to me, and that was the beginning of the log. And I wrote most of it in San Francisco and finished it in Dixon.
Some of your fans see it as a kind of metaphor, perhaps a parable about your own travels in life, that you end up now in this Garden of Eden.
Well, I'm not certain. It was Rosemary's mother, Alice, was legendary, and I had not met her, and so she was in the background as this kind of almost perverse muse. And then something I realized later, after I'd written it and it was beginning to sail away, as it were, when we lived in Ireland, we were there for 6 months, where our son Adam was born. And the couple we rented the house, it was Glenalua Lodge. It was a big house they'd cut in half, and we rented half. And they lived in a greenhouse out in back. Huey and Rosamond Nuttall Smith. They were farmers who had retired from then one of the Rhodesias. And it was Killiney Hill above Dalkey and above Dublin. So I think that couple sort of entered in subconsciously into the composition of the book.
We'll quickly go through some of these other ones. This one was very well reviewed. The Canyon. It's a coming of age, perhaps.
Coming of age,
14-year-old boy.
And it was an attempt to write a conventional narrative from the point of view of a more or less normal person, as opposed to the demented narrators who are mostly in my other novels.
Do we have any demented narrators coming up?
Oh, yes.
With Seed?
Seed, that was a book, a novel I had a lot of fun with. And I really enjoyed writing it. It's an old guy who's giving away his possessions to his younger relations, many of whom he has not met since they were kids or babies even. And he plays with them. And he's really looking for a spiritual heir, which is not a term he would use.
Yeah.
But in writing that, I used follow the dictum of the Beats. I didn't know it at the time. First thought, best thought. Because in Mr. Starr, he talks, he's not certain what he says, and he's not certain what he imagines. So there's a lot of slippage between what's conscious and what's verbal.
And one more before we get to your latest one, Intimacy.
Intimacy, that's a demented narrator who, it's again what I call a system novel, and the system of this young man is his wardrobe, starting with his shoes. And it was a book I did not want to write. And it took me a long time, not because I needed the time, but because I was dragging my feet. And eventually I finished it. And it sat unpublished for a long time.
Now, not demented, but idiosyncratic in the way that we love is your brand new book called Village, a novel about a northern New Mexico village, and with all of the grand tradition of idiosyncratic behavior and our own cultural characteristics that you don't find anywhere else on earth. I mean, it's been compared a little bit to Milagro Beanfield War, and it's a day in the life of the characters in this village. They're so vivid. They're so wonderful. And they're up against, and the underlying issue is, of course, in New Mexico, water.
Right.
Tell us, this just came out in 2017.
Right, but I wrote it back in the early 90s. I was very active in my own village in northern New Mexico. I knew everyone. I was in and out of everyone's houses. And I wrote this as a love letter to my village. But at a certain point, I got cold feet. And said, this is getting a little bit too...
they could really...
Yeah, so I put it away and forgot about it.
They would figure out who you were referring to in each character. Yeah.
Well, the characters are composites and imagined, with one exception, the nicest guy in the book, who's long gone now. But I put it away. I had prepared for the end, and I had a plotting problem, I thought. And I remembered that I'd only written the first couple of chapters. Well, I found the manuscript a couple of years ago, and lo and behold, I'd written all but about 3 chapters, and I had prepared for them. So I finished it, and I'd also forgotten who I'd based a lot of the characters on. So, hey, I had fun.
Yeah, yes. Well, it's a delightful read.
Thank you.
But you are legendary in northern New Mexico for your work as a farmer and your nonfiction books. This Mayordomo, the Chronicle of an Acequia in northern New Mexico, was a winner of the Western States Book Award for Creative Nonfiction. And so you came as an outsider into these very hierarchical, stratified cultures where the Mayordomo, although he's not the highest elected official, he's in charge of the water.
Right.
So what did you discover about water management in a small village and the power of the Mayordomo? Oh, let's tell him what a Mayordomo is. I'm sorry.
A Mayordomo is the ditch boss.
Yeah.
If you wish, the commission or comisión is 3 elected members or parciantes of an acequia. Now, there are 1,000 acequias in northern New Mexico. They operate under traditional Spanish water law, which is to say tradition brought from North Africa. And the word acequia is Arabic. Anyway, the Mayordomo is the ditch boss, if you wish. He's the executive director. He's under the direction of the commissioners. I did not want to be Mayordomo. I had been a commissioner from probably about 1974. And the tradition in my village, at least, is newcomers are often elected as commissioners. And, of course, you're flattered. You think, oh, they really appreciate my worth. Well, the real reason is that they're hoping to get somebody who will take one side or the other of a feud that's been going on for generations. Anyway, my entry into the village was through the acequia. Rosemary entered the village through the school. She wrote plays for the kids virtually every year from kindergarten well beyond elementary school. And that was her entry in the community. So between us, we got to know the community quite well and quite fast.
So how, I wanted, this is a book that so many people truly love. It's called A Garlic Testament. You've won lots of awards for this. It's Seasons on a Small New Mexico Farm. In Dixon, you have a farm called El Bosque Garlic Farm. And what is your history with either how you ended up in Dixon or what brought you to garlic, of all things?
Well, to start with Dixon, Rosemary and I, when we met on Crete and got married in Athens, and about the same time we got to know a young American painter, Joe Bonner, Dworka now, and he was painting up a storm. And he was from the Bay Area. And when we came back, in Rosemary's case, when she came to the States, we went to the Bay Area and we looked up Joe, and he was living with 2 families with lots of kids, some the age of Adam. And they moved out here. This was the time of Easy Rider. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to get out of the city, and we looked around Northern California. Eventually we said, well, let's go to New Mexico. So they had already found us. We were going to live in Santa Fe. They had already found us a house in Dixon. So Dixon it was.
Dixon it was.
And then garlic. My mother was of a German, born in Poland, but of a German family. She loved garlic, and at the time it was not fashionable unless you were Italian. And she would serve garlic bread at dinner parties and apologize for it. So that was probably a seed. And then when I got here and we started growing and selling at farmers markets, Taos, and then Santa Fe, nobody was growing garlic except this one old guy who I actually never talked to. And I started fooling around and figuring out how to grow it.
Well, the book itself, it's just such a fascinating read. I knew nothing about garlic going in, but what it represents in terms of its efficacy as a healing substance, mm-hmm. and what it does for food and what it represents is just wonderful. You talk about selling at farmers markets. You yourself had a lot of policy influence in the Santa Fe farmers market. One thing I'd like you to talk about is, did you not encourage a policy where food stamp money would be matched so that a hungry family who with $50 worth of food stamps could buy $100 worth of healthy, vibrant, beautiful vegetables and fruits and garlic?
Well, I was part of that way back when, I'm guessing 97 or 98, in the early days of rail yard planning. I was involved in that for the Farmers Organ nonprofit under a Ford grant that I'd worked up. And at that time, food stamps went electronic. And this was a problem for farmers at the markets because nobody had any kind of reader. And even the readers that were being proposed in, say, the Green Market in New York were very ponderous. So I helped develop a program whereby you could, with your EBT card or whatever it was then called, your food stamp card, you could get coupons, mm-hmm. Kind of like the old food stamps. And so we did that for a couple of years, but it was actually not successful, and the overhead was more than it was worth. So that dropped, but others kept up with the idea, and eventually the Double Up Food Bucks program, which is now statewide in New Mexico, in Santa Fe, there's no limit. You could take all of your food stamp money and double it basically at the Santa Fe Farmers Market.
Well, we're speaking today with Stanley Crawford about his many books, Village and A Garlic Testament. We're still on the Garlic Testament now. There's an issue in contemporary American life called food deserts, where there are areas, particularly in inner cities, where you could not find a vegetable. Right. And now to know that in New Mexico people can find, be it chilies, potatoes, onions, garlic, whatever it is, and wonderful apples from Dixon indeed. that it just adds so much to the health of our state. I thank you very much for pushing that through. So talk to me about your philosophy of farming. I understand that when your farm, you allow people to come in on Friday afternoons and visit the farm. You have a beautiful guest house, the Tower Guest House. And so people can see how this is run. I'm sorry I don't have pictures of the stacks of garlic ready to go, all these beautiful plants. So do people, you know what, it's WOOF, Workers on
Right.
Organic Farms.
Right.
Do you ever get people like, that's an international movement for young people to go work on organic farms?
Not exactly, but I have 3 interns at the moment, and one of them is a student of mine from Colorado College. I teach there more or less every other December. And so Ben actually volunteered. I didn't even suggest the idea to my class, which eventually I do, but when he heard I farmed, he came forward and asked whether I had interns. I said yes. So then he brought a friend of his he grew up in Baltimore, from Baltimore. And then there was another CC student who was looking for work and not finding it. So I ended up with 3 for a short time anyway. And I mean, they're great. They can do the heavy lifting that I no longer want to do. And they're enjoying it.
So I have seen some YouTube tours of your farm. I haven't been there myself. And they were talking particularly unusual about you is that it's not all cultivated, that you balance wild areas with the cultivation. And you were saying that it helps keeps the moisture in the soil in this very dry, hot New Mexico climate.
Well, I do have basically hedgerows around the field, and the bottom of the field there's the little road or lane, and across the field there's a cottonwood grove, and so it's a wildlife corridor, which is nice. We see all kinds of birds come through and leave.
Yes. So I have this wonderful bucolic picture of your farm in Dixon and the best return to nature and all this. You have been in the middle of an international controversy with the biggest Chinese, Harmony International Spice.
Right.
The Chinese are violating perhaps a whole lot of tariff laws. And, well, you tell us the story.
Well,
but I just want to the article in the LA Business Journal was competitors raise stink over garlic. Who can resist a line like that? Tell us what is happening.
Well, there's 200 products are subject to what are called anti-dumping rules. In other words, a product that is competing unfairly with American product can be assessed a duty, an anti-dumping duty. But there's a way to game the system, and legally, and Harmony Spice has done so for the past 12 years. So they have paid no duty on garlic at all. Now, we have challenged that as a domestic producer. We have the right to challenge that. We have done so twice. This is the 3rd time around. The 4th time is that period of review is beginning. At one point, we were doing so well, and Harmony Spice walked away from essentially what is a Department of Commerce audit, which subjected them to about $200 million in duty. Well, through some, I'm not certain how to say it, some skullduggery, we lost, and Harmony got away with it yet one more time. There are now close to a dozen law firms that are circling our little patch of garlic.
I know.
Which is unbelievable. I mean, it's staggering, and we figure that Harmony has spent $10 to $15 million trying to stop this. They question our standing as a garlic producer, but we file taxes, we have depreciation records, we have employee records, we have loan records, on and on. This time around, I did go to Washington with 2 other garlic growers that are part of our group and our trade attorney, Ted Hume, in July, and by then I'd understood this very complex law. I basically said to them that you're allowing the system to be corrupted. There were 7 or 8 commerce people in the room. They were very quiet. And then I pointed out that there will be a major documentary coming out in February. And Ted, our attorney, and myself are the main fixtures of that. Harmony Spice and its California allies, Christopher Ranch and the Fresh Garlic Producers Association, declined to be interviewed. So this will be out in February and will be seen by 110 million people.
What is the name of it? I will look for it.
We don't have a name either for it's a 6-part series. We don't have a name for the series.
Well, I'll wait. You just let us know.
We don't have a name even for the episode. But there's 6 episodes about food issues.
Yeah. So one thing I was really interested in as I started to research this controversy was the staggering numbers. I think that they do, is it 200 million tons? And you...
Oh,
it's a huge disparity.
Right.
And also that if they were... So this dumping we've also seen with the steel.
Oh.
It's a strategy for them. But so California's the main producer of garlic in America, right?
But it's tanking.
Because how can they compete?
How can they compete, and real estate pressure also.
Yeah, and water pressures too, no doubt.
No.
But with the huge amount, and I think some of these lawyers that are attacking small garlic growers probably make more per hour than you do per year.
Absolutely.
It's we are for the underdog, and we love that this garlic battle, but the fact that they're harassing you and kind of threatening you, that is very disturbing to us. So I'll look for the documentary, and I'm sorry that, again, in court, the Commerce Department walked away, and they just didn't want to deal with it, even though you said, look what's happening here.
Well, we've taken it to, they decided against us, but we have taken that decision to the Court of International Trade in New York, which is a federal court. And we expect that they will remand the decision to Commerce and tell them to do it right. And then Commerce will probably appeal to the U.S. District Court.
Well, some of the things I learned from the garlic book is that you said people will really love you if you give them good garlic. And that you must, every day at one of the farmers markets, you hear stories of, I bought supermarket garlic and there was nothing in the clothes. And you were talking about the shelf life of garlic, and you just can't have it plastic wrapped and sealed. It needs to breathe. A lot of things like that. Also, you talked about why certain farmers markets were important to you. So of course you go to Santa Fe, but tell me why Los Alamos, that farmers market, is so important to you. Do you remember what you said?
Well, I went up there. I was trying to write about Los Alamos in 82, 83. And I realized I was very ignorant about the place, even though most of my neighbors worked there. They didn't talk about it. So I spent, I would go up once a week and wander around. And I knew a few people up there, not very many, and I talked to them. It was much more open than it is now. I went to the library a lot and looked stuff up. And I was really training myself to write nonfiction. I didn't know it at the time. And the way I would work was I would go drive around and drive by the plutonium facility, and there would be a bunch of guys out there playing volleyball. And this would stick in my mind. And a couple of days later, I'd sit down and write a passage about that, starting with the guys playing volleyball in front of the plutonium facility and how odd that was. I gave up after... it actually turned out to be the 40th anniversary of the founding of the lab, and they threw open the doors, and there were great talks, and it was a very exciting time. At the end of that, and in many ways very gratifying, at the end of that time, I realized I didn't have the science to write about this, and I didn't want to write about the death machine. So I dropped it. But then... as I say, it taught me how to basically become a character in a nonfiction narrative by observing myself, by observing what was out there. And then with the first Gulf War, which I was appalled by all kinds of things, but the fact that we were basically defending or rescuing this repressive sheikdom seemed to me crazy. Anyway, that was when I wrote the Los Alamos chapter of A Garlic Testament, called the atomic bomb ring,
Yeah.
which was one of these rings that you got if you sent enough cereal box tops
Yes.
and $1.
Yes. And it's lovely because you did derive great pleasure from these scientists coming in and looking through your garlic and buying your produce, and you knew it was a way of grounding them. Farming as a therapeutic lifestyle, farming as a counterpoint to the complexity of modern life. Give us just a minute of your thoughts on farming and what it's done for you.
Well, it's given me a tremendous amount, and certainly there were times when I felt worn out and tired and discouraged, but I got through that. In part, working on the development of the farmers market site in Santa Fe gave me a break from that. I also taught a couple of semesters at UMass Amherst in the winter, and that was like a vacation from it all. But I think that, and I should say, I don't listen to the news until the evening, so I'm not obsessed by what's going on until late in the day when my work is done. But first of all, you're outside. You're working outside, which to me is mostly wonderful. There are difficult times, of course, but of course there should be. And working with the earth and seeing the changes. I think I said something in a Garlic Testament. Farming is like painting on land or painting with the earth. You see the changes. Today we spread mulch over about half the field, and so all of a sudden this interesting carpet of wood chips covers the field that 2 or 3 weeks ago was green cover crop. And then aside that some farmers resist, I really embrace. I like meeting my customers. For me, the market is a great social event, which I miss when I stop going in the winter. I've acquired a number of friends through the market.
Well, we'll have to leave it there, but people can find out more. I really recommend, for nonfiction, A Garlic Testament. This is still a very popular book. And your new book about a village in northern New Mexico, it's called Village. Thank you so much for taking the time. Our guest today is Stanley Crawford. Thank you.
Hey, my pleasure, Lloyd.
And I'm Lorene Mills. I'd like to thank you, our audience, for being with us today on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next time.
Past archival programs of Report from Santa Fe are available at the website reportfromsantafe.com. If you have questions or comments, please email info@reportfromsantafe.com. Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.